Hey, good morning, everyone. Everyone is coming in. So we still may just give it a few minutes before we start, but as we're waiting on people to trickle in, welcome back everyone that was here yesterday. I'm seeing some new names. So it's some people that are joining us today. So hello to everybody. Please feel free to do what's comfortable for you. Even yesterday, some people had their camera on throughout the presentation, and that's great to see people's faces. Well, whatever you feel most comfortable with throughout today. As you're coming in, if you can please put your name in the chat. A couple of people have already done that. As you know, if you've attended our conferences before, you know that's the way we keep up with attendance, and we need to do that in order to be able to send out the CE certificates. Thank you so much for putting your name in the chat. Thank you. And so just please be mindful of that throughout the conference, that I'll make announcements every once in a while asking you to put your name in the chat. And that's our way of keeping up with attendance throughout the day. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And you'll see that Eric put a couple of links in the chat to the slides for the presentation this morning and to the handout. So that was, of course, in the email he sent out a couple of days ago as well. But you're able to click on that to access the slides and the handout for this morning's presentation. All right, let me see, anything else? If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat function. That's what we're using for questions today. And towards the end of this presentation, you'll see another link that'll be for the evaluation. So definitely pay attention to the chat today. That's where we're doing a lot of our communication through the chat for attendance. We're using it for links, for resources, all of that type of stuff. All right, I think that's everything. Again, welcome everybody. Yesterday was amazing and great. So we know that today will be as well. We have just a power-packed slate of speakers. We were just talking before we got started that Eva Woodward yesterday, who talked to us about cultural humility, already introduced you, Beth. She already introduced you. She said you're an awesome, dynamic speaker. So, of course, we all look forward to that today. This first presentation today is being recorded. So we appreciate you giving us permission to do that, Beth. That will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. And most of the presentations today will be recorded, not all of them, but most of them will be recorded today. All righty. Well, again, welcome everybody. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. But Tisha, Dr. Dean, if you don't mind, yes, are you able to do that, Tisha? Introducing our speaker. Oh, I can't really hear. Well, that's right.
What's happening with my Zoom?
Oh, it
And
kind of
I have an introduction built in, so if it doesn't work, like everyone will get to know exactly who I am very momentarily.
Yeah, I forgot that her yeah, well, we want to do, I know I said a little bit. Help me pronounce your last name, Beth.
Prusasic.
Prusasic. Okay, I think it's important to pronounce people's names correctly.
I appreciate that. I'm sure you get that a lot too.
Absolutely. So Dr. Beth Prusasic is an assistant professor at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. She specializes in improving healthcare for older adults by understanding how to better implement existing research findings into practice and policy. Wonderful. She is also a former journalist and brings an expertise and a passion for science communication to her current academic career. She's active on academic Twitter with over 3,500 followers and has been featured in national and local media. As a current researcher with a background in journalism, coupled with her academic focus on dissemination science, Dr. Prusasic has a unique perspective on how other academics or clinicians can leverage the power of science communication, specifically Twitter, to promote their work and engage with others to advance their causes. This is great. I'm looking forward to it. So as you all know, today is about the role of media, social media, and technology and what we're doing in psychology. And Beth, we really feel like this is where things are moving. A lot of people are kind of getting into this space. So we look forward to hearing from you. You're the expert on the topic. We're just going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Kyla. I appreciate the introduction and Eva's, touting my praises yesterday, like big shoes to fill. She's amazing. So I am happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a, little bit more introduction so you all know who I am, and I definitely want to get to know everybody who's on the call as well. You can see there my credentials. I am not a psychologist. Please don't hold that against me. I am a social worker though, and I feel like we all are trying to do the same things. I feel like nursing, psychology, and social work, we're all sister fields. So I come to you from the field of social work, and I hope that you don't keep that against me. But the talk title is, I've given this talk a couple of times before, and I always call it Communicating Beyond the Academy, but I recognize that lots of folks aren't in academia and they're clinicians or they're community organizers or activists. And so this, I hope the word, the academy doesn't make you think this doesn't apply to you if you aren't in academia, because the principles of science communication and communication in general really apply, whether you're in academia or clinical practice or policy. So this is really just, how do we as professionals and scientists and clinicians, how do we communicate to non-scientists, non-clinicians, just the general lay public, the press, or policymakers. All right, so the plan today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who I am so that you know more about why I'm giving this presentation. And then, like I said, I'd like to hear from you all in the chat, sort of your backgrounds and where you're coming at this topic from. And then explain a little bit about what science communication is broadly, because we were sort of discussing before others joined the call that social media is just one piece of science communication, and maybe you're not jazzed about getting on social media. I hope to change your mind during this talk, but there are other avenues of science communication. So I don't want folks to think, that if they aren't on Twitter, that they, have no other way to share the important work that they do or the things that they're passionate about. There are other avenues for science communication, and I'm a big advocate of all science communication, and hope folks can find their place among all the different ways you can do that. So I definitely want to spend a little bit of time just broadly talking about science communication. And then the bulk of this will be about Twitter, and we'll go over the basics. And when I say basics, I mean the basics, because I have also learned that there's a wide range, right, of folks who have never pulled up Twitter before, never had an account. And then I'm sure there are folks on the call here who have accounts and use it regularly. And I want to hear from everybody if you have tips and tricks. I am not an expert. Twitter changes so quickly. All of social media changes so quickly. It's hard to be an expert. And if anyone has been following the news in the last 24 hours, Twitter just got bought by Elon Musk. And he has fired the heads of all of the parts of Twitter. I don't think as a fundamental, it's not going to change fundamentally. It's still going to be the same app with the same, good communication principles. But a lot of the things that I'm going to show you today and sort of screenshots from Twitter and privacy settings, I really don't know if those will change. So it is hard to be an expert in something that is constantly evolving. So I know that there are things I still don't know about how to best utilize the platform. And so if you are an expert, you're a more advanced Twitter user, I definitely want to hear from you and share your insights with the rest of us. So we'll get into the more advanced Twitter stages of this talk at the end. And then I actually want to pop out of the PowerPoint and show you Twitter and kind of do a little walkthrough, and then have a lot of time at the end, not a lot of time, but have some time at the end for a wrap up discussion, Q&A, and we can talk about other types of science communication things as well during that time if you'd like. All right. So, and I'm going to try and monitor the chat and do my best, but if there's and I was telling Kyla this before, if there's a burning question you have that I need to clarify, please interrupt me. I am happy to be interrupted and to answer questions, but I just might not be the greatest at seeing it in the chat. So feel free to sort of just unmute yourself and interrupt me. That won't bother me at all. So let's get started. Know your audience is the first sort of lesson. And I like to lead with this because I want you to know who I am and I want to know who you are. So this is a good principle, I think, like in communication in general, right? Whether it's personal or professional, you should know the person or the group that you are speaking to, so that you can tailor your information to that audience. You know, how we sit down and talk with our family is going to be a bit different than how we sit down and talk with our friends. So it's a just general good communication principle. But just as important as knowing your audience, I think it's important to explain to your audience who you are, so that they know why they should listen to you on that topic. It's important to know how to tailor your message, but part of tailoring your message is letting the audience know, hey, I'm an expert in this topic, or I have, you know, experience with this topic, and this is why you should listen to me. So let me tell you a little bit about why you should consider listening to me on the topic of science communication and Twitter. I'm faculty at WashU, just a little hop, skip, and a jump up from Arkansas. And as I said, I have my background in social work, and my research focuses on older adults, implementation, dissemination science, rural health, dementia. So that's the typical elevator pitch, right, that academics usually give. We say what our rank is, what our university, our background, and our research. But none of that tells you why you should listen to me on the topic of science communication, because we all have our professional credentials, and nothing I have told you tells you that I have any expertise in science communication. But I actually have the background in journalism, as was mentioned in the introduction. So I have my bachelor's degree in journalism, and I worked as a newspaper reporter after graduating. I had no intentions, or I didn't even know sort of what was beyond getting your degree in journalism and being a journalist. So I had no intentions or aspirations of going into any other field or getting any sort of graduate degrees. It turns out people are not reading newspapers like they were 50 years ago. So newspaper jobs are hard to come by. So I was, 23, fresh out of college, trying to find a job, and didn't have a whole lot of opportunities for newspaper positions. And so I was looking for anything, actually, and got hired as a research assistant to interview research participants for a study on living kidney donor transplant. And I fell in love with research. I loved the process. I loved just the way it exercised those parts of my brain. And I was pretty straightforward from that point on, like, oh, I want to do research. So I made that switch into social work and into research. But I have this whole sort of former life as a journalist, which has been really, really helpful in my academic career, not just from the writing and the grammar and the punctuation training, but just really knowing how to craft a compelling story. Because I think that is so much what we do in these worlds, is we're really trying to convince folks of what we know to be true. And that really is about crafting a story. And my journalism training is really helpful for that. I practice what I preach as well. I don't just talk about my past experience as a journalist. I still like to engage with the media and do my own science communication. And I just put sort of a couple screenshots here. And I chose these specifically because, on the one hand, you're like, ooh, the Huffington Post, CNN, MSNBC, it looks really fancy. And it was wild. I had an article that I wrote in the Huffington Post go viral. And then I got invited to be on CNN and MSNBC, and that was sort of a just wild experience. But that is actually, I think, not the most effective science communication. Certainly reaches a lot of people, but I don't know that it has the impact that staying local does. So I have a couple of screenshots there from op-eds that I've written in our sort of regional newspapers. Springfield News Leader is in Springfield, Missouri. The Southern Illinoisan is the Southern Illinois newspaper, and that's where I'm from. And I put this on there specifically because I don't want folks to think, to do science communication, you have to be in the HuffPost and be on CNN. That's great. And certainly that matters. And we all probably during the pandemic have seen folks who have done, tons of media interviews and had a really big impact. But I think if you're really trying to impact and reach the people who can make concrete changes in your community, local is better. And local is, it's much more likely you can get an op-ed in your local newspaper than you can in the HuffPost. So I not only advocate for targeting local papers or local outlets just from the ease of getting into them, more so than the New York Times, but because I think you have a greater impact. So you do not have to shoot for CNN in order to be doing science communication. I think local is better and easier. So now I'd like to hear a little bit about you all in the chat, a couple of questions for you. So first, I would like to just, and you don't have to you don't have to answer this in any specific way, but I'd like to know from you all, what's your comfort, your skill, your confidence in just communication, period, to a lay audience. So some questions to get you thinking, like, how comfortable do you feel explaining the importance of your work to someone who's unfamiliar with it? Or how confident do you feel that you could respond when someone confidently states something incorrect about your work? I'm sure we've all been in these situations where somebody is just 100% certain about something that they are 100% wrong on. How do you respond? And then, what about when someone asks you the so what? So they understand that I am doing research on rural dementia care, but they're not interested. They're like, okay, so what? Tell me why I should care. So just tell me in the chat how comfortable or confident, or what have been your experiences having these types of conversations where you're talking about your work and your passion with people who are not at all part of your field and don't know what you're talking about. And my boss has told me I am freakily good at awkward long silences. I have no problem sitting with silence. So I will until I see some things in the chat. Oh, okay. Moderately comfortable. Yeah, the jargon is really tough to break, right? Because we're trained for so long to increase our jargon as we proceed through the ranks. No problem with the type of work that I provide. Oh, Bob, I'd love to know more about what type of work you provide. Gary, very comfortable. And this is what I love. If, Gary, you have tips and tricks for folks, please share them. I want this to be a crowdsourcing tips and tricks presentation. I don't have all of them, so I would love to hear more. Yeah, the nerd weeds. I love that, Tisha. That is, I've never heard that phrase, but that's definitely, yeah, we're off in the nerd weeds. Psychological value. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that seems like that would be something that would resonate pretty easily with a lay audience. They would probably understand that really well. Pretty good, but yeah, always improve, always learning. These are really, really great. It sounds like we have a range of folks who are very comfortable, very confident, definitely some concerns about not using as much jargon, medical language. Oh, yes. Yeah. I gave a talk to a women in science group. We'll get into talking sort of to groups in a minute. And I was trying to explain the work I do with implementation science. And I was explaining sort of how we, as researchers, try to understand why people, typically healthcare providers in my case, don't adopt the new medical practices. And I didn't know who I was speaking to. I was just having this conversation to a group of people who supported women in science. So it was men, women, children, everything. It was just, it was at a local brewery. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he was like, I own a bar. And it's like, I tell my bartenders, to give new glasses to every customer when they come for their next beer, but they still don't do it. And I realized it's because they said the customer is coming with their beer, with a little bit left, and they feel like it's rude to dump it out and cheat them out of that beer. And he's like, and it never occurred to me. And I was like, that's implementation science, those barriers to implementing. And so it was just it was a great lesson to me that, somebody who has no connection to the research world or the healthcare world was able to take the concepts of implementation science and understand them in his world of being a bar owner. So I think there's always opportunities to take sort of this, explanation of what we know in our science or in our clinical practice and translate it And you never know, some people it's just going to really resonate and they're going to get it. Comfortable, but others' misconceptions about psychology can be challenging at times. Absolutely. That I feel that as a social worker. I can't tell you how many times people have just assumed I'm taking people's kids away. Not at all what I do. Good stories. Yes, absolutely. Yes, the good stories. I had somebody email me just a couple weeks ago asking, what makes a good story when you're talking to a policymaker. And we can talk about all that. I don't talk about communication to policymakers in this talk, but if during the Q&A at the end, folks want to talk about how you craft a good story and what makes a good story, we can definitely go there. Awesome. Well, thank you all for giving me that sort of insight into who you are and where you're coming from for this topic. The next thing I'd like to know from you all is a little more specific to this actual talk, and that's about Twitter. So I'd love to know, what's your experience with Twitter? Are you an expert? Do you not even have an account? If you have an account, how long have you been on there? How often do you go on there? I found a lot of people have accounts, but they don't use them. They don't even know what the password is. So tell me a little bit about your experiences with Twitter. Never used. Awesome. Well, Bob, I've got you covered. I'm going to teach you how to use Twitter if you want. Have not been on there in a couple of months. No social media, none. Check posting dailies, rarely use. Yep. Had an account, but deleted it to avoid doom scrolling. Fair. No experience. Awesome. This is good. This is really helpful just so I know from a purely selfish standpoint, how to tailor the rest of the talk to you all and know kind of where you're at. It is hard to get into the groove, Tisha. If anybody is on Twitter regularly and follows me, you've probably seen I haven't posted in a long time. I'm definitely out of a groove right now. And I think that is, a big part of getting confident and comfortable with social media is knowing that it's okay to ebb and flow. Some people are on there all the time and some people aren't on at all, and you do what's comfortable for you. I have a rarely used account. I got it for a class in grad school. I'll share my story of why I got on Twitter for academia in a while, but it was also in grad school. I feel like grad school is a place where you get thrown into the fire a lot. Facebook seems much more addictive. Yep. Used to use it, but haven't. All right. So this is great. So we have folks who are on there, never been on there, are trying to use it more, kind of going in and out. And that's what I hear every time I give the talk on Twitter, is a range of folks who are getting used to it, are interested in it. I gave a talk a couple weeks ago and somebody was just flat out like, nope, won't use it. Never. And I was like, okay, why are you here? But I maybe just hearing about it a couple more times, maybe they'll change their mind. So it's all good. Wherever you fall along the spectrum, at least you'll have a little bit more information after this talk. Awesome. All right. So thanks for getting that interaction going. Hopefully it also woke you up a little bit. I know it's Friday morning. And you had the conference yesterday as well. So that's helpful for me. Hopefully it gets you all engaged a bit and know each other. Now let's move to science communication more broadly. As I said, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this just in case you are one of the folks who's very anti-social media. Just know there are other avenues for you to do science communication. Science communication, you'll hear it called SciComm, and you'll see it on Twitter as hashtag SciComm, science communication. And the first thing I like to start with is, what is science communication? And there's a lot of definitions out there. I actually like this list from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And it's their list of what are the goals of science communication. But I think it really makes for a nice definition, because if you're doing anything that is trying to achieve one of these goals, you're doing science communication. So for me, this has been a far better definition than if you actually looked up a definition of science communication. So what are the 5 goals of science communication according to the National Academies? Share recent findings and build excitement for science. This is probably what most people think of when they think of science communication, is sharing your research findings and saying, hey, look, I found something new, or here's a new paper, or here's what I've seen in my clinical practice. So sharing recent findings and building excitement for science. Increasing public appreciation for science, which is, I think, really, really important. So you don't have to be sharing something new. You don't have to be the cutting edge or leading edge clinician out there on the front lines. Just being able to increase public appreciation for science, which I think, again, is really, can be taken really broadly to mean, showing the diversity of scientists, showing the diversity of the work that we do, and science very broadly, right? We, as a social worker, I was always trained, there's evidence-based practice and then there's practice-based evidence. It's all under the umbrella of science. And so if you're a clinician and you don't do research, you still have you're scientifically trained, and you have your practice-based evidence that is that needs to have more engagement with the public. Increasing knowledge and understanding of science. This one's a tough one, right? We heard it in the chat that translating that jargon and that scientific language into the lay audience, is tough. And so the more we're out there doing that work, the more just the general public will have an increased understanding of science, which is never a bad thing. This one's really important. I think probably even though it's number 4 on this list, I think it's probably the second most sort of thought of goal of science communication, and that's influencing the opinions, policy preferences, or behaviors of people. We usually think what we are doing is important and should be acted upon. If we have a new finding or if we have experience that we think other people need to know about, we generally want them to act upon that. And that might be changing their opinions, changing their votes, changing their behaviors. So I think that's a big one, is just trying to influence change. And then lastly, ensure that a diversity of perspectives about science are considered when societal problems are pursued. And I look at this in 2 ways. One is just making sure science is brought to the table when societal problems are pursued, that it's not just, the business and the business leaders and policymakers at the tables, that we have the scientific experts also at the table. But I also look at this as a diversity of perspectives among scientists. So I think probably generally know that if we leave things up to chance, the makeup of a given table is not going to be very diverse. And so being able to engage in science communication and find that part of science communication where you can get in where you fit in, even if it's not social media, is going to bring more diverse scientific perspectives to that table, which is equally as important as just getting to the table in the first place. So I really like these 5 goals, again, because I think it's a definition. If you're doing something that is trying to achieve one of these 5 things, you're doing science communication. So again, keep this in mind. If you feel like maybe you're not going to be the Twitter all-star, there are ways to still do that. And so what do those ways specifically look like? This is a list of 5 bullet points. There are probably 500. This is just a smattering of them. But besides Twitter, you could write a blog post. There are a lot of professional societies and just organizations that have blogs on their websites, and they would love for you, especially if you're a member of that professional society or that organization, to write a blog post for them. I'm a member of a professional society called Academy Health. They have a blog. They love when their members want to write blogs, and they'll help you. You don't just have to know how to do it on your own. If you have an idea, if you have something you want to share, you can often reach out to these organizations. They usually have their own communications person who will help you, craft your story, edit it, make sure it's nice and polished, and then they'll put it up on their website, on their blog. So writing a blog post is a really great way to get your message out there. And it's also, a little nice package. You don't have to invest in a Twitter presence over and over. It can kind of be a one and done, but it shouldn't be. You should continue to write more blog posts, but write a blog post. I think that's a really easy way to engage. Creating a website. I don't know that if you create a website, sort of like if a tree falls in the forest, right? You can create a website, but if nobody ever sees it, I don't know how much good it's doing, but I think it's still really good to have. If you don't already have your own I say like personal, professional website, or like we all have our websites that our organizations put together for us. You know, I'm listed as faculty on WashU's website, but I have my own personal website that is my professional life, and that will continue with me if I change universities, you know, as I grow and I change positions. And I can always point people to that website to really get the full picture of the research that I'm doing. And I'm going to skip down to that last bullet point about making a YouTube video because it's related to the website. I have a colleague who has her own website for her career, her profession. And anytime she has a new paper published, she makes a 1-minute video explaining what the paper is. You know, this is what we looked at. This is what we found. This is why it's important. And she posts that YouTube video on her website. So it's really accessible to the general public, not only because they don't have to pay for the article, which hopefully nobody ever is paying for journal articles, you know, like there's ways to get them. I hate the firewall, paywall stuff. But, you know, people can access the content and it's in a digestible form. It's a 1-minute video. You know, they don't have to read the paper. And of course, we don't want to encourage people to watch a 1-minute video and say, oh, I understand the complex nuance of her research study, but it makes it, again, it increases interest, it increases appreciation. People who might be interested want to know more will reach out to her. So you can make a YouTube video. And if you have a website, you can post it on your website. You can share that YouTube video to Twitter. I don't do YouTube videos as I was sort of suggesting earlier, sometimes it's hard to keep up with all of the things. And that's just a thing I have not decided I have the bandwidth to do, but it's a great thing. If maybe you don't want to write and maybe you don't want to do social media, but you're very comfortable just turning on your webcam and recording a video for a minute, do that. And then giving talks to local organizations. This is what I was sort of sharing the story from earlier. If none of these things, writing or making videos or social media are your things, get out and talk to local organizations. I have found there are always, you know, local groups that are looking for speakers who just want to have sort of interesting topics to discuss. There's a group here in St. Louis, and they meet I think once a month at a restaurant. You know, they rent out the like basement room of the restaurant and they invite a scientist to come every month and talk about their work, talk about the importance. They're not people who can, you know, they're not funders, they're not policymakers. They're people who are interested in science and in research, and they just want to learn more. And it's wonderful. I've attended the talks, I've presented at them, and it's just a really great way to engage with the public. And for those in the chat who were saying, you know, I struggle with translating my jargon or my complicated work to that lay audience, practice makes it easier. You can kind of try out different ways of explaining things to see what lands and what resonates. And so the more you do it, the better you get at being able to craft that message in a way that resonates. And so give talks to local organizations, accept any invite you get. The more you do it, the better it gets. So again, these are just a few ideas. If you're not going to be active on Twitter, you don't want to do Twitter or social media, think about all of these other ways to get involved. Just try to get involved, because most people don't. So why even get involved? I've told you what science communication is. I've given you some examples of what you could do. But I haven't really told you why you should do science communication. And I like to answer this in the reverse by telling you why most people don't get involved from what I have heard over the years. The biggest one is it's not our job. You know, I'm trained to do this, or I'm paid to do this. It's not my job to do science communication. And what I tell people who have this perspective is, you know, yes, technically, you know, like in my faculty offer letter, it does not say you will get on Twitter and write op-eds. It's not technically my job, but we all get into whatever field you're in, research, academia, practice, policymaking, you know, community organizing. You probably got into it because you wanted to make something better, the world, people's lives, whatever. And you're not going to have that impact if you're only talking to each other, to ourselves. If we're not reaching out to the world, to the outside world, we're not going to have that outside world impact. So if you think about kind of taking a step back and saying, my job, what I wanted to do was to help older adults living in rural areas, I know that I'm not going to have as great of an impact if I just keep publishing papers in journals. If I really want to help older adults in rural areas, I've got to talk to those, civic center directors about their programming. I've got to go outside of my field. And so I think if you think about it as part of your job, in that you got into your job to make a difference, then hopefully that motivates you to sort of get outside of the traditional outline of what your job is. But I also know it's fair that we don't get rewarded for it. Even if you have the passion to do it, it's not something, especially in academia, that you get rewarded for. Again, my promotion and tenure requirements don't say, tell me how many blog posts you wrote, tell me how many talks to local organizations. So it's true, we don't get rewarded for it in the traditional sense. That is changing, and I will talk about that on the next slide. So hopefully you just put a pin in that, because I do think we get rewarded for it in those traditional ways. But that is the thing I hear probably the second most, is it's not my job, and then I don't get rewarded for it, so I'm not going to do it because I don't have time. The other thing I hear is I don't understand. It's overwhelming to learn Twitter. I don't know I don't want to learn anything new. And we're uncomfortable learning new things because we've been learning new things for a really long time. And we finally feel like we're kind of in our lane, and we just want to stay in our lane. We're probably all somewhat type A, being professionals that we are. And we don't like that sort of uncomfortable stumbling around in a new area feeling. And I get that. I'm the same way. I don't use Microsoft Teams despite my whole institution's push for it. I just don't want to learn something new, and I'm just not there yet. So I get that sometimes it's hard to jump into learning something new and feeling like you're starting all over. But hopefully through this talk and others that you probably have seen or will see, you can start to dip your toe in a little bit more, because I promise you can learn it. We all know that, right? You can learn something new, and you can push through that uncomfortable feeling and get to a place where you feel comfortable. So going back to that middle point of we don't get rewarded for it, I think that's changing, and we have science to show that it's changing. So there's been a number of studies looking at using Twitter for academics for professional reasons, and what's the sort of tangible benefits of using Twitter. And they've been associated, it's been associated with getting more professional speaking invitations, getting more invitations to present your research, collaborations on papers, grants, projects, media requests for interviews. I have been personally just complete cold messaged on Twitter from a journalist who's like, hey, I saw you posted about this paper that you just published on Facebook and COVID data. We'd love to have you on our radio, program. So you can just really leverage your one little Twitter post into a media interview on the radio, which then, of course, my university wanted to talk about. So it's a great springboard for more science communication, and then also more manuscript citations for the academics in the Zoom room. If your name starts to become synonymous with a particular topic, then somebody's just gonna, as they're looking through Google Scholar or PubMed, they're gonna see your name, they're gonna know that you're legit, they're gonna know that you have the credentials, and there's just going to be some sort of implicit trust in you as an expert because they've seen that name on Twitter and they know that you're an expert in that field, and that leads to more manuscript citations. So these are the things that as an academic I get rewarded for. These are the things that my department chair is interested in, and Twitter has been associated with increases in all of those things. So even if my chair doesn't care that I'm on Twitter and that I had a tweet go viral, there are some downstream benefits that we do get rewarded for. So if nothing else has convinced you, if you are purely in it for the career advancement, getting on Twitter can help you advance your career. All right, so that was my spiel about science communication broadly. I hope that you're interested in those other avenues as well, but now we're going to really talk about social media as a science communication tool specifically. And specifically, we're going to talk about Twitter, but just know there are a lot of other social media applications, platforms out there, which you all know. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. I'm going to talk about Twitter. I would say Twitter is the most frequently used, most commonly used, most associated with sort of science and academics and research and clinicians and practice and healthcare. TikTok is becoming more that way. Certainly with the pandemic, a lot of doctors were making TikTok videos, and it was becoming a much more used platform for that. LinkedIn is used a lot outside of academia. I have a lot of colleagues who are in the policy worlds or in the professional worlds, industry, and they're all on LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn the way a lot of you sounds like you use Twitter. Like I have an account, but I never go on there, but it is an option. But Twitter's the one I think most people use. So that's the one we're gonna dive into today. So I like to start again at a high level, just giving you some general principles to effectively use Twitter. Then we'll dive into really the nitty-gritty specifics. But if you are just looking for that high-hitting Cliff Notes version, and these are really probably good for any science communication. These are good science communication principles in general, but try to communicate clearly, use non-technical language. Folks said that in the chat, that's a hard thing to do. It absolutely is. And as somebody who does older adults research and gerontology, I will not use the ageist trope of like, pretend like you're speaking to your grandma, but you just want to try and remember that you are speaking to people who are not experts, and read through things as many times as you need to. Hand it to somebody who isn't an expert and say, hey, does this make sense? What's confusing? And just, you don't have to push something out. You don't have to tweet something until you feel good about it. So take the time to really work on that language if you feel like you're getting stuck in the jargon. Don't hedge, but also don't get out over your skis. This is something that's really tough, especially if you went through a research training, like a PhD program. You're always being made to feel like you're not quite the expert yet. You still have more to grow. You need to put in all your limitations. So I think, inherently start to really back off of our expertise. Twitter's not the place to do that. Twitter's the world, right? So you are an expert in many, many ways. So don't hedge, don't dial back your expertise. Obviously, don't get out over your skis though, meaning don't, go outside of your area of expertise. And this is something that you have to actively work to make sure it doesn't happen. An example is, and I sort of suggested this earlier, I published a paper using Facebook data to model COVID spread. The paper was it was a methods paper. I was seeing if this new data set and social network analysis could be used together. Basically, like, does this data set have insights that this analytic method can reveal? COVID was the case study. I'm not an infectious disease doctor, clearly. I'm not even a public health trained person. I do social network analysis, and I was interested in this Facebook data set. We used COVID as the case study. Well, people see Facebook and COVID, and that's why the media requests were coming. People are like, oh, that's so interesting. And I really had to push back on, I am not a COVID researcher or expert. I'm not an infectious disease. I'm not a public health. Like, this was just a methods thing. So you have to be aware that people, because it's hard for them to understand science that they're not familiar with, you have to be on guard so that you don't get taken as the expert. Because again, that's doing the opposite of science communication. That's not informing people and giving them a better understanding of science. You're actually misleading them because they're thinking you are an expert in a topic that you're not. So own your expertise. Don't always back off of it, but make sure that you aren't getting out over your skis. Be confident, but not pompous. Nobody likes a know-it-all. I think we all probably get that, but you will see that on Twitter plenty, people getting into really heated arguments, and that's just not good practice. Bring your whole self as privilege allows. And so what I mean by this, and there's science to show that the more effective Twitter users are ones who really talk about their whole lives. You don't have to share things you're uncomfortable sharing with, but if you're only posting about your new paper or your new grant or your promotion, and you're showing nothing about you as a person and your personality, people aren't going to engage with your content as much. So bring your whole self. Again, don't post things you're not comfortable sharing with the world. There are plenty of things I don't post, but I do talk about my background growing up in a rural area and how that influenced my research, and what it means to have the privilege that I have as a faculty member. So bring your story. People like that, and it makes for more effective engagement. But I added this last part at the end because I have a colleague, she's in my PhD cohort, and she's a Black woman. And she said, Beth, there's a lot I can't share on Twitter because I will be judged for bringing my whole self as a Black woman. And it was a really good reminder to me that we all don't have the same ability to bring our whole selves. So I added that as your privilege allows, like I can bring things to the masses that she can't, and a white man can bring things I can't. So as much as you're comfortable and as much as you can, bring your whole self. Don't just sort of be that robot of papers, grants, my clinical practice. Show the world who you are. Also, don't lurk. Be active. I have a colleague who I love dearly who is on Twitter all day long, but never posts. He's just on there scrolling. He doesn't engage. So he knows things. He's way on top of sort of the field of implementation science, but you would never know that because he doesn't actually post on Twitter. He just reads Twitter. And again, going back to that science, it shows that the most impactful Twitter users don't just use it to promote their own work, but to engage in curating and contributing resources to a broader conversation in their field or area of interest. So you have to be on there, not just lurking, reading, not just posting about your new paper or your new grant, but really engaging in that conversation, which means asking questions, sharing your insights, responding to other people's tweets, jumping into the conversation. Twitter's not a place where you have to wait to be invited to join a conversation. If you see people talking about a topic, jump right in, engage in that conversation. But obviously, like any good social media, don't be too active. You don't want to be posting every 30 seconds and filling up people's feeds. They'll unfollow you or mute you because they're tired of seeing their entire feed be Beth. So don't be too active. And I think if you've ever been on social media, you probably know these types of people, and it's pretty easy to avoid being this type of person, but just remember, you don't want to overshare. All right, so we'll move on to the basics of creating your handle or username, kind of exactly what you should think about and consider when you go into that. A Twitter handle, it's the same thing as your username. You will hear people call it both. It is unique to you. It's how people find you on Twitter. So that's why I spend a little bit of time talking about it, because it's so important. It is the thing that people will become synonymous with you. It shouldn't just be your email address or something nondescript or private. It should help others identify you and be easy to remember and short, which we'll talk about on the next slide. It's not case sensitive. I'll show you why that's important in a minute. So these are some good Twitter handles. These are ones that I don't know these people. I picked them because I thought they were good Twitter handles, but these are the things that, the examples that I think you can try and model your own after if you don't have a handle already or you want to change. So Dr. Jen Hall, that's pretty straightforward. They're a doctor. Doesn't tell you what kind of doctor, but Dr. Jen Hall, name, doctor. Amy Adonti, that's their name. It doesn't tell you anything more, but you definitely know who that person is. And then the last one I like, because I've a lot of times when I give this social media talk, people will tell me, I'm managing the Twitter account for an organization or for my center or for my practice. So it's not me, it's the center, it's the organization. And so they have questions about how you manage Twitter from that sort of lens and that perspective. And so if that's you, I think this is a great handle because, it tells you exactly almost tells you exactly what that content is going to be. CVD is not the greatest use of, that's not a good lay terminology. It stands for cardiovascular disease, but you wouldn't know that if you were just a random person. So it's not great, but if you know CVD stands for cardiovascular disease, then you know that this account cares about preventing cardiovascular disease. I actually don't remember at this point. It's been so long since I put this slide together, what organization or group this is. But if they had used their likely acronyms for their center, that wouldn't tell you anything. So I did my doctoral training in a affiliated with the Center for Mental Health Services Research, CMHSR. You can say CMHSR around WashU, and people know exactly what you're talking about. If I go anywhere else and say, oh, I worked in the CMHSR, that doesn't mean anything. But you might be tempted, especially if you're managing and creating a Twitter account, your first instinct might be, oh, my handle can be at CMHSR, but that doesn't tell anybody anything. So don't go with the acronyms, even if they're very well known, because that's not going to tell people what that account is about. And again, you're really trying to reach beyond your academic or your professional circles. So I like something like Preventing CVD, because it tells people that account is going to be about preventing cardiovascular disease. I might suggest not doing CVD if I could have, consulted with this group, but it's better than just acronyms, right? So these are, I think, examples of good Twitter handles. Some not so good Twitter handles, and I will take partial credit for the first one because I used to be on the board of this organization, at Implement Collab. So this organization is actually called the Society for Implementation Research Collaboration, SIRC, CIRC. If you're in the fields of implementation science and you say CIRC, everyone knows what that is. CIRC wasn't available handle. SIRC had already been taken, which wouldn't have been a good handle anyway, for the reasons I just mentioned. But the decision to just choose partial words of the words of our organization's name is not a good idea either. Implement Collab. This is a problem because you have to remember which words, right? It's not even the two words that are next to each other in the acronym. It's implementation research collaboration. So it's implement and collab. We cut off the words at weird places. So you have to remember which two words and where they're cut off. It's also long. And when you're working with only a certain number of characters and you want to tag implement collab, you're using a lot of characters just to tag our account. So not a great Twitter handle. And like I said, I take partial responsibility because I was part of that organization. So should have probably chosen something different, but we're here. The middle one is an example of why you need to remember that it's case sensitive. So is this Samiam? Is this Samium? I don't really know. They probably meant Samiam, but if you can type it out and it's not, got the proper capitalization, it looks like this, which defeats your purpose. So just try and keep in mind that things don't have to be case sensitive, and you need to think about what your handle would look like if it wasn't. And then anything with a bunch of numbers at the end is a bad idea. If you put into Twitter your preferred handle and it's not available, it might suggest alternatives and they might just have numbers at the end. Just spend some more time thinking before you pick that. Anything with a bunch of numbers at the end, random numbers, looks like a bot or a troll, and people will just generally discount it. So spend time thinking, don't just choose the next best, with a bunch of numbers at the end. All right, so let's see. When in doubt, just go with your name. Add your credentials if you need to. So for example, Beth Prasasic was available. That's a pretty uncommon name. Nobody had chosen that, but I knew it was prone to spelling errors. So there was no way I was going to put my full last name as my Twitter handle. But Beth P was already taken. That's a very common, that was of course gone. I could do Beth P PhD, but I knew that the double P would be prone to errors. People would be typing quickly and they would just type like Beth PhD, which is somebody else, or they would accidentally do 3 P's and that's probably something else. So I just didn't want that double P in there because I thought that could just add complications when it didn't need to be. So I chose Beth P _DI, which stands for dissemination and implementation. And it's not the greatest, actually. So the way, and I suggested or alluded to this earlier, this story. So the way this came to be, I had a Twitter account that I think was actually Beth P STL for St. Louis. And I was a first or second year doctoral student at a conference, and I'm standing by my poster. I'm very proud. And one of my mentors comes up and he's very proud. He's like, I'm going to take a picture and tweet it. He was very big on Twitter. And he's like, what's your handle? And I panic because I knew all I had used Twitter for at that point in time was to ask food trucks where they were going to be because I wanted to go eat from them for lunch. So I was like, oh no, he cannot look at my Twitter account. He cannot look at Beth PSTL because he will see all of my food truck stalking. So at my poster, frantically, I'm creating a new Twitter account, and Beth P_DI for dissemination and implementation was born. It's actually, now that I know more, not the greatest, because who knows what DI stands for? Not many people. But it was what I came up with. And you can always change your handle later in time. But at this point, it's so synonymous with my account that I wouldn't change it because it would be confusing. So it's fine. It's good. It works. But that was just the thought process I went through. So if you don't have a Twitter handle yet, or you want to change yours, these are sort of the things you need to be thinking about so that you have something that is short and easy to remember. Once you have your handle, where would you put it? Where would you share it? A couple of places. I think we've probably all seen now. It's in everybody's email signatures. So you can always put it there. It's a good way for people to find it. Included in presentations, you can see mine is at the bottom left of every single slide in this slide deck. And if you can put it on every slide, I think that's great, but at least put it at the beginning and the end. The reason I like it on every slide is because your results slide might be the like, woo, that's crazy. Look at that graph. I got to take a picture and tweet that. So you want to have that information on that slide so that when someone takes a picture, it's and puts it out onto Twitter, there's your Twitter handle. So try and put it on every slide. I don't think it really takes anything away from the presentation, but at least put it at the beginning and the end, because you want people to be able to find you and tag you and share and credit your work. Many journals are now asking for one. If you have submitted a paper to a journal in the last few years, you may have seen during the submission process being asked for you and your co-authors' Twitter handles if you have them. And if you didn't, probably blew right past that because you were frustrated at all the other things they were asking for. But if you have a Twitter handle, please put it in there because if your paper gets accepted, the journal and the publisher will often tweet about it and tag you, and they have huge Twitter following. So it's a great way to get more exposure to your account, bring in new followers. So really highly recommend getting a Twitter handle, if for nothing else, then when you go to publish your papers, the journals and the publishers have that. Once you have your handle and you've got it in all the right places, you're ready to go, you really start to then use Twitter. And Twitter is just like any other social media. It's at its core about getting people to follow you and you following other people. So you've got your handle and now you're just in the ether of Twitter. One thing about privacy settings that I think is a little different, if many of you are on Facebook, you probably have it set so that it's private to some degree. Only your friends on Facebook can see your content. And you can set up Twitter that way so that only people who follow you see your tweets. But in general, most people don't do that on Twitter. It kind of defeats the purpose of sharing information with the public. So keep your account public and open unless you have a really good reason not to. But just remember that anything you tweet can be seen by the world. People can take screenshots too. So I always try and remember, and you'll see people on Twitter who won't delete tweets. They'll just go in and sort of retweet a correction, because deleting tweets is great in theory, but somebody's probably if you tweet something that's really problematic, somebody's probably taken a screenshot anyway. And so it's just really good to remember that anything you put out there is going to be out there for the world. But that's the point, is you want to share your information with the world. So I don't recommend setting it up to be a private account where only people who follow you can see your information. All right, so now we'll move into what exactly a tweet is and all of the different features and like buttons on a tweet. This is something I hear so much from folks is like, yep, I understand social media. Like I understand I have to create a username. I understand privacy settings, but I don't use Twitter, and I get on Twitter and it looks different from Facebook, or it looks different from Instagram, and I'm overwhelmed and I just sign off, which is fair. Like I said, I don't use Microsoft Teams for that exact reason, so I get it. So I want to walk you through exactly what you're seeing when you look at Twitter, so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming when you get on there. But first, I think we can take a little 10-minute break. Happy spooky season for anyone who celebrates. Halloween's my favorite holiday. So, all right, hopefully folks are settling back in. You got some coffee, some Halloween candy, which I have got to stop. I'm not going to have any more by Monday. But hopefully folks got to stretch a little bit. So we're going to come back slowly. And Kyla put some questions in the chat, which are great, and questions that I hear all the time. And so I'll sort of answer those as folks are getting settled in, before we move on to the anatomy of a tweet. But one question she asks, do you find that more people are accessing social media, including Twitter, for science communications, and if the pandemic impacted that? And I think as a general trend, absolutely. More people are turning to the internet and then social media and Twitter to learn about science and to talk with and engage with scientists. And I think the pandemic did impact that. I don't know, and I'm sure there's research that I'm not aware of, that more people were getting on social media because they couldn't go out of their house to talk to people about it. I think just the unfortunate world of social media and Twitter, it sort of exploded during the pandemic because it was a controversial topic, which is, of course, wild that it's the pandemic was controversial, but anything controversial and anything tied to politics is going to fire up social media. So I think it did increase in that sense. The pandemic caused an increase because it was it's a politicized topic, and people were arguing the politics of it on social media. So I don't know that it necessarily, because people were sort of stuck at home, turned to the internet more for their science needs. But in general, the trend, of course, pre-pandemic, and I'm sure it will continue now, not that we're post-pandemic, but just more and more people are turning to social media for their news, for their science, for their health related information. So that's also, I have a colleague who's, boy, does he really dive in. He's a emergency medicine physician at in New York. He was actually he was the guy, as he called himself, he's the Ebola guy. He was the US citizen who got Ebola when he was treating folks over in Africa. But he goes on, with Fox News and all of these conservative news outlets, with knowing he's sort of going into sort of hostile territory from his perspective as a scientist and as somebody who comes from a very liberal perspective. But I asked him, and others have asked him, why do you do that? It's so hostile and it's so angry, and you're just in these really intense, heated arguments about politics and about, perspectives that are different from yours. And you're just a doctor. And his response, I think, was so great. He was like, well, if I don't do it, it's not like that conversation's not going to happen. It's just going to happen with somebody who isn't as expert as I am, who doesn't know what they're talking about. He's like, so I have to be there because I have the expertise, because I am the one who knows the science. And he's like, so it's my job to be there because someone else will be if I'm not. And I loved that. It was a really great reminder that, yes, it can get really nasty on social media, and we should all prioritize our mental health. I don't think anybody here would disagree. We should all prioritize our sanity and our well-being, and not engage if we don't want to, but just know that, there's a need for people who are experts to engage in the conversation, even if it can be really nasty. So that was, I think, a really good lesson for me. So I think, yes, people are turning to it more, which is why we need to be on there more. The other question, is there a difference in demographics from Twitter to Facebook to Instagram? And yes, definitely. And that the sort of demographics are pretty easy to find online. If you Google, the differences, Facebook tends now to be an older group. I really care about this and know about this from my rural work. More rural folks use Facebook than they do Twitter. So if I'm trying to reach rural individuals, I'm going to, advertise my study on Facebook, not on Twitter, not on Instagram. So you should definitely be considering that when thinking about your target demographic, and doesn't hurt to be on all of them, but that's hard to keep up, right, and manage. So, really think through and do some researching into what exactly, who exactly you're trying to reach and what platform is going to be the best for that. Tisha asked a question, what are your thoughts, practices on managing those who disagree? Yeah, I try to not do the arguing. I know that some people do. Like I have Twitter colleagues who will really spend the time, like my friend in New York, who will spend the time just going back and forth, because he sees it as sort of his role as the expert. He doesn't want to just walk away. But and we were sort of talking about this before everybody joined, he's doing work that is more politicized. I do like dementia research and services. And as I said, like nobody's really coming for me because I want to try and give, like Papa more services in his, on his farm. It's just, I don't tend to get that much. So I don't have to really kind of decide how I want to engage with somebody who's being disagreeable or negative. But I think I'm a really big advocate of anybody on social media doing what they need to do to feel safe and protected. And so if you don't want to, and it can change day to day, hour to hour, if you're like, nope, not today, not arguing, just closing the phone and moving on with my life, like that's fine. If you want to engage, you should do to whatever degree you want to feel comfortable and safe. Some people, like I said, take the approach of this is, my role as the expert. Some people just think this is too much. I tend to lean towards it's too much. The only experience I really had was when my article in the Huffington Post went viral, where I was writing about how, as a person who studies how we get people to adopt healthcare practices, I couldn't get my own family to adopt COVID precautions. And so it was the politicization of COVID. I got a lot of messages on Twitter, sent to my email. People found me on Facebook, sent me messages on Facebook, and I didn't address a single negative one, because I just knew sort of this was just what happens when something goes viral, and it'll die down and it'll be fine. The one thing I had to do, I didn't have to do, but it was a good thing to do. I didn't even think of it though. Someone pointed it out, was because people were emailing my work email address, which I didn't include in my, I didn't say like, if you have suggestions, please email my WashU email address, but it's Googleable, it's findable. So I started getting a ton of emails to my work email. And my boss was like, we should probably just give a heads up to security at our building, even though we're not there. It was the pandemic, everybody was working from home. They're like, she was like, if they can find your email address, they obviously could find your office address. And we just wanted to give security a heads up, because you just don't know if somebody's going to decide like they want to come and see me in person. Nothing happened. It wasn't a big deal, but that was the one sort of thing I did to just be careful when I got a lot of the disagreeing negative feedback. But in general, I don't get that very much. And if I do see someone commenting, I just don't acknowledge it, because it really doesn't, to me, I rarely changed minds and hearts when somebody is coming at you from that perspective. You can usually tell when they're really interested in wanting to have that conversation versus they're just on there and looking to argue because they have nothing else to do. So it's really about what you feel like doing that day, if you feel like dealing with it or not. But I think for most of us, unless you're one of these folks who's doing really sort of politicized, polarizing work, we were talking before, I have a colleague who does gun violence research, and obviously anything she posts gets a lot of comments. If you're doing that kind of work that is really going to be just bring people out on social media to argue, you just have to decide how much you want to engage. For most of us, though, I don't think we get that much as regular folk. But good questions, and questions I hear all the time, and that I think are really important to think through, because you might find yourself in that situation, and it can be overwhelming. I remember when my HuffPost article went viral, and I woke up and it was just so many emails and texts, or not texts, direct messages that I felt very overwhelmed because it had never happened before. All right, so let's move in to the basics of a tweet. There's my GIF, he's back, he's awake. All right, so I have here a tweet that I took a screenshot from a couple weeks ago when I was putting these slides together, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what you're seeing when you see a tweet, because this is where I feel like people get the most overwhelmed, because it doesn't look like all social media, applications look different. And it really does take kind of understanding what you're looking at before the rest of Twitter will make sense. And it's just like learning anything new. You just kind of need that really clear roadmap. So this is a tweet. You're going to always see a picture up here at the top. That's the user's profile picture. So the John A. Hartford Foundation has their logo as their picture. If you looked up my profile, you'd see my headshot. So you're always going to see a picture of the account. You're going to see their username, which is not the same thing as their handle. So you'll see their handle, which is always preceded by that @ sign. That's going to be in that gray font right after their name, but their name is going to be whatever they want it to be. So mine says like Beth Prososic, PhD, MSW. This is the John A. Hartford Foundation. So there's the name of the account, and then there's the handle. Then there's the date of the tweet, which is somewhat important because you will have people retweet or share, and we'll talk about what a retweet is a little bit later. They'll share their information, or they'll share a tweet from a long time ago. And if you're not paying attention, you'll think it's a new, a new tweet. I think social media every so often would freak out because somebody would retweet about Betty White dying, and everybody would be like, what? Betty White? Of course, now she's actually passed, but you would have to really pay attention to like, well, when was that tweeted originally? So I just think knowing where the date is of a tweet is important, because sometimes you'll see something and think it's new, and if you look at the date, it's quite old. There's hashtags in this tweet, which we're going to talk about next. Hashtags are really, really important. So you can see that the word is blue, meaning it's a hyperlink, it's a hashtag. There's also a shortened hyperlink to this. I don't know if this is an article or whatever. They're wanting you to link. The Hartford Foundation is asking you to click on this link to go read whatever this is. So there's a shortened hyperlink. And then they're tagging another Twitter user. So again, anytime you see the @ symbol, that's somebody's user handle. So they're tagging this other account called Reframing Aging. And then they have a link preview. So whatever that link is, this is the preview to that website. You can also put in a GIF here or an image. I recommend trying to do that almost all the time. If you don't have a link, just put a GIF, put an image. Because that boosts your tweet in the Twitter algorithm. Things with visuals kind of get bumped up higher and more interaction, which is good. So anytime you can put that in there, put that in there. And then here are the sort of ways you interact with a tweet. And this is the most important. So if you want to comment on this tweet, you want to reply, just say something about it, you would click that little comment bubble. If you wanted to retweet, which we'll talk about in a minute, is essentially sharing. If you wanted to share this tweet with your Twitter followers, you would click that. If you just want to like it, this is similar to Facebook or anything else, you just click that heart, and that just sort of like you're endorsing, you're saying, I like this, this is good content. And then this here at the end, this little arrow is basically more options. And when you click on that, you'll see a little drop down that gives you options. Like, do you want to send this tweet to somebody in a direct message, a private message? Do you want to bookmark this tweet for whatever reason? Or do you want to copy the link to the tweet? Those are not commonly used, which is why they're sort of relegated to this little more category, because most of the time you'll either be commenting on the tweet, you'll be retweeting the tweet, or you'll just be liking the tweet. So those are the buttons at the bottom, and they'll be under every single tweet. So when you see a tweet and you like it, or you want to say something, those are the buttons you'll use, which I think can be missed. And that's why it can feel like, how do I even interact with this app? Those are the ways you're going to interact. All right, so hashtags, really important. You saw them in the tweet, the anatomy of a tweet. Let's talk about them. They're a way to index your tweet. And I think one of the best ways to utilize the power of Twitter, because sometimes it can be hard to get, it is hard to build a large following. And if you don't have a lot of followers, you feel like you're kind of tweeting into the ether. But if you use hashtags and people are following those hashtags, now your tweet is being seen by a lot more than just your followers. So I think they're really, really important. As I said, they can tag your tweet to content, tie it to an event or a topic. I'll explain a little bit. I think when I explain what they actually are, that'll make sense. But this is what I was saying earlier. You can follow hashtags to see tweets from more than just the people you follow. So sometimes you don't know who to follow on Twitter. You get on there and you're like, I don't, you follow the like 5 friends that are on there. Follow me, I'll follow you back, but you don't know who to follow. So follow a hashtag, which you can do. And then in your feed, you will see all the tweets that include that hashtag. And if you see a tweet that is interesting, relevant, you think, oh, I'm going to follow that person who made that tweet because they probably are going to tweet more. Or you can at least look at their profile and see if they seem like somebody you'd want to follow. So it's a great way if you use them to get followers. And if you follow the hashtag, you'll find new people to follow. So to find what even hashtags are relevant to your area, the first thing I say is look for the other people in your area and see what they're using. So as an implementation scientist, I would look at other implementation scientists, people I know who are doing implementation science, like Eva Woodward, and I would look to see what hashtags she's putting in her tweet. And I would look at some other implementation scientists, folks who I know, see what they're using. And probably pretty quickly, you'll start to pick up on the main ones that are relevant for your field. So for implementation science, we use hashtag IMPSCI, IMPSCI, implementation science. So that's the one I would start following and I would start using in my tweets when I'm talking about implementation science. Conference hashtags are really important, which we will talk about in a minute. But just when you get on there and you want to start building your feed with content, I think some really general good ones to follow. Hashtag academic Twitter is the big one. Hashtag psychology, psych science, mental health. These are all good things to just follow. And then, like I said, your feed, what you see when you open Twitter will be tweets from the people you follow, as well as tweets that include these hashtags. So they may not be, and probably aren't people you follow or accounts that you follow, but the tweet includes a hashtag that you follow, so you will see it. So good places to start building your feed so that Twitter is more interesting. Because if you get on there and you only follow 5 people, all you're going to see are the tweets from those 5 people. And I've heard that from folks too. Is they're like, I got on there, I started following, my 10 colleagues and it was boring. And so I stopped. So following hashtags actually makes it interesting. Conference hashtags, as I mentioned, really, really important. And I think somebody, I don't know, they've popped the handle into the chat. I don't know if there's a hashtag for this conference, but they're really great. They're the way I think to engage with your colleagues that you maybe never meet in person. I've met a lot of people through Twitter because we're tweeting at the same conference. And, it's like, oh, you're in ballroom A, I'm in ballroom C. So it's a great way to meet people in real life too. Almost all conferences have their own hashtag. APA 2022, SBM, Society for Behavioral Medicine 2022. They're always usually the acronym and then the year. As I said, they're a great way to get exposure, engagement. So how exactly would you use Twitter if you're at a conference? Well, first figure out what the conference hashtag is. And then, like anything, you'd run a tweet about your presentation or your poster, tell people to come to ballroom A at 8:30 on Sunday morning to see your poster. It's poster 22, put in the title. You can include a cliffhanger, like, don't you want to learn, how we looked at this, or here's our main takeaway. But so you can use it for promotion, self-promotion. Everybody does that. You should do that too. You can also tweet about what you find interesting from other people's presentations and posters. And I think this is an even better way to get engagement because it's not just about you. You're tweeting about someone else, so they'll probably retweet that and their followers will see it and then they'll follow you. But, if you're walking through the poster session, and you find an interesting poster, take a picture, ask, the person standing there, hey, can I tweet this out? ask them if they have a Twitter handle, use the right hashtags, use the conference hashtags. If you're taking if you're sitting at a talk, take a picture of the presenter up at the podium with their slides in the background, tell everybody what they were talking about in your tweet, use the conference hashtag. It's really just about sharing the conference with people on Twitter. It's good if you can, to get the author's permission. Like if you're taking a picture of someone's poster and they're awkwardly standing next to it, it would be polite to say, hey, do you mind if I post this on Twitter? In general, conferences, people are assuming their work is public because they're presenting it to 3,000 people in a ballroom. So you don't have to ask the keynote speaker afterwards if you can tweet their picture. But it's good. It's just polite and good practice if you're standing with someone and you plan on tweeting about what they just showed, to ask if they mind, but you don't have to, and nobody, I think, gets upset if you don't. But if you can ask, it's always nice to get permission. And then live tweeting is a thing. If you haven't ever heard of this, it's basically just tweeting as much of what someone says as fast as you can. So it's trying to sort of do a live transcript of somebody's talk. You only have so many characters, so you can't just do a full block of text into the tweet, but you're sitting there and you're just trying to, type as much as you can, send, type as much as you can, send, over and over. And you're trying to kind of put a live transcript onto Twitter. This is really helpful. I think we've all been to conferences where you want to be in one session, but you have to present at the same time, or you have two sessions you want to go to. Well, hopefully, if you're on Twitter, you can be listening to one presentation and then on your phone looking at Twitter and kind of getting a live transcript of that other session that you wish you could have attended. And if you're the one doing the live tweeting, people will start seeing it. They will think, ooh, who's this person? I need to follow, because they're clearly engaged. They're clearly, trying to do, help out other conference attendees by doing this. So I've gotten a lot of my followers in my early stages. When I was a doctoral student, I would go to conferences and just try and live tweet, take pictures of posters and talks and tweet them and use the conference hashtag. And a lot of people would start following me, because people who aren't on Twitter very much tend to come alive during conferences. So you'll get a lot of engagement during conferences if you're on there. And then join in the conversations with other attendees. So again, you don't have to wait to be invited to a conversation on Twitter. If you see people talking about, a session and it's relevant to your work, comment on their tweet and say, hey, I did a study on this, or hey, this is the population I practice with, and here's my experiences. Join in. That's a great opportunity. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit, because I've told you sort of do this and do this, but again, what does it look like? What does it look like when I want to tweet about a poster? You've told me it's important, but what does it actually look like? So these are some sort of templates for tweeting specifically about things. So let's say you want to tweet about a new publication that you have, a new article. Key pieces you want to include: you want to say what the paper is about. If you haven't read it, say like, I'm excited to read this paper about Facebook data and social network analysis. If you've read it, even better to say what you liked about it. Don't just say this was a good paper about Facebook data and social network analysis. Say this paper was interesting because XYZ, or they found XYZ. Include a link to the paper. And if you don't already know, you can shorten hyperlinks through a ton of different websites like Bitly, Owly, Google. You just put in the large hyperlink and it will shorten it into less characters, which is really important when you only have a certain number of characters. You want to always tag the authors. If they're on Twitter, tag their institutions or their organizations. If it's a publication, again, tag the journal, tag any professional societies. A lot of journals, the journal is sort of hosted by the professional society. So make sure you tag that professional society as well. Include relevant hashtags. And then take a screenshot of the paper title with the journal name and authors, and include that picture with your tweet. As I said before, getting an image in your tweet is always better than no image, because that image sort of gives it more, it gets boosted in the algorithm. So it's going to show up in more people's feeds. So always include like a screenshot of the paper. So what does that actually look like? And I didn't choose this solely for self-promotion. It's just a really good example of this kind of tweet I'm talking about. It just happens to be my paper. But this is a paper I published over a year ago in Open Forum Infectious Diseases, which is an Oxford publication. So Oxford Medicine, the publisher, tweeted this tweet about my paper, and it hits all the right notes. It says exactly what the paper is about. You see their little summary. You can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here's the shortened link, the bit.ly link to my paper. They tag me. They tag the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is the professional society that runs and owns Open Forum Infectious Disease, which is the journal. And then they use all sorts of relevant hashtags, the IDSA journals, Vaccines Work, World Immunization Week, Open Forum Infectious Disease. And then this is a screenshot of the paper. So this is what I was saying. This isn't a link preview. This is a screenshot of the paper. You can see the title of the paper, the author's name. Here's the DOI. Here's the date it's published. Here's the journal's name. So it's just a visual. So it boosts in the algorithm, and it provides more information than you can actually put in the text because you've run out of characters. So this is a great template to follow. If you have a paper that you want to talk about, tweet about, whether it's your paper or not, kind of just keep these building blocks in mind and you'll have the right tweet. If you want to tweet about your own paper, so that was the publisher tweeting about my paper. If you want to tweet about your own paper, but maybe you don't want to go to all that trouble, here's a more stripped down template that is good. So this, I don't know this person, but Ian Lundberg, tweeted about a new paper they have with, and they tagged their two co-authors. And, then he says, we make only 1 point. And then he gives a summary, a bottom line to his paper. And then there's the link. And the link preview is the image here. So you don't have to go into doing hashtags and all of that kind of stuff. You can just do this. It's better than nothing. So I put that in there because I recognize like this can feel overwhelming. So start here, tag your co-authors. The one thing I would just at least add a hashtag that's relevant. I don't know what this paper is about, but I'm sure he could have just done like hashtag statistics. Like that would have been something. Add those hashtags if you have the space. All right, so now you're at a conference. You're not talking about papers anymore. You're talking about posters, presentations. What are the key pieces you want to include in those tweets? You want to just describe what's being said, why it's important. You want to include a picture. As I said, that's always good. Tag the authors, same thing, their institutions, journals, professional societies. Make sure to include the conference hashtag. That's, I think, key. If you don't have the conference hashtag in your tweet, it won't be connected to the conference, which is fine. It still goes out to all of your followers. It still tags all those other great people. But the conference is probably where most people that's what people are going to be following at that time. And that's the content they're going to want to be seeing in their feed. So it won't show up if it's not tied to the conference hashtag. So an example of this, which is straightforward and great, this is somebody in the audience of a talk, and they take a picture of the presenter, the slides, and they give that one-line summary: 1,000 new enrollees in Medicaid associated with 22 fewer evictions per year at Professor Heidi Allen's research. So they tag the presenter, and then they use that conference hashtag ARM19. So this is simple. This probably took 30 seconds to take the picture on your phone, maybe a minute to put in, and put out on Twitter, and it got 109 likes, 46 retweets. And I bet Adriana probably got a number of new followers who saw her tweet because they were following the conference hashtag. And so they think, oh, this is somebody who's clearly in my field because she's at the conference. I'm going to follow her. So pretty simple. This one's a little more complicated, but I think it's great. This is somebody who's tweeting about just generally the conference, their work. So they use the conference hashtag SBM19. They use the relevant, they tag other people, they tag, the special interest group and their colleagues, the institutions. They use the right hashtags. And this is going back to one of my early points, bringing your whole self. So they have the obligatory stand next to your poster picture, but they have a picture with their fun colleagues where they're clearly having some fun, and they're doing the networking that we all do at conferences. So this is another great template. Take some pictures, Just say how much fun you're having, put your poster in there, use the right hashtags. This is going to be a tweet that maybe you're not sharing content, but you're just saying, hey, I'm here, I'm part of your field, follow me, and people will probably follow. All right, so I mentioned early retweets as one of the ways you can interact with a tweet. At the bottom, there's the comment bubble, there's the retweet bubble, there's the like heart. So retweeting is a main way you can interact with a tweet, probably what most people do. And it's essentially sharing. If you're on Facebook, you share Facebook posts. Retweeting is the same thing. But what I wanted to be clear here is there are two types of retweets. There's a sort of simple retweet and there's a quote retweet. So a simple retweet is just simply sharing someone else's tweet with your followers. You don't add anything to it, you just share it and it suddenly appears to all of your followers. It's amplifying the original tweet. A quote retweet is sharing someone else's tweet, but you get to add your own commentary on top of it. What does this exactly look like? So here's an example of a simple retweet that I did. So this person, Mateo, has a nice tweet about geriatric medicine. As I've said many times, older adults researcher. So I liked the tweet. I thought, so you can see once you like a tweet, it'll go from gray to color. So I liked this tweet and then I retweeted it because I thought it was an important message that I wanted to share with my followers. So I clicked the retweet button. And that's it. It just got retweeted. And so now people who follow me would see this in their feed and it would say here, it wouldn't say you, it would say like Beth Prasasic retweeted. And they would know that that's how it showed up in their feed because someone they follow, retweeted it. But then a quote retweet means you get to add basically your own tweet on top of it. So this is my colleague, Carolyn, who got tenure. She tweeted about it. I was excited. I wanted to, share her good news, but I also wanted to say something about it. So I quote retweeted it, which means I got to add my own tweet on top, literally on top of her tweet. So I added, just that she's a good person and it's great. And so now this shows up in my feed and in my followers' feed. So her original tweet is still visible underneath, but then I have my own tweet on top of it. So if you have something you want to say, if you want to, argue with the original tweet, it doesn't have to be just positive stuff. Anything you want to say about that tweet, you can retweet it with the quote retweet so that you get to add that commentary. So that's important. When you click the retweet icon, you'll have the option of retweet or quote retweet, and that's what that difference is. So the last pointer I'll give, and then we'll shift to, we'll probably not jump out to Twitter in the interest of time because we will if folks don't have questions. But the last thing I wanted to point out is what they call threads, which as professionals, we're all probably fairly wordy. And so it's really great to be able to write a thread because if you're like me, you can't just sum up your point in one tweet, like, oh, just need a little bit more. So a thread is the way to do that. So this is an example of let's say I wanted to tweet this out. This is a tweet I wrote, but I have more to say and I'm out of characters. How can I don't want to end here. What you can do is click this plus sign before you tweet, click this plus sign and it threads. You can see the little thread there between my two profile pictures. It adds another tweet to your original tweet, but it connects them so that it's not just out there, two tweets in the ether. So you click the plus sign and then you add another tweet. You can add more. And then if you want to keep going, you keep just hitting that plus sign over and over, and it just keeps adding threads to your tweet. And then when you're finally ready, you've said all you want to say, then you just click tweet all, and it'll all be tied together. Before they created this feature in Twitter, people, and you'll still see this as a holdover from the past, I still do it too. People in their original tweet would end it with like 1/ whatever, to let people know, like, this is my first tweet of 20. And so then they would do the next tweet and it would be 2/20. And so that way you could kind of find them and piece the conversation together. This thread feature has eliminated that, where now they're actually tied together so that you can just keep reading all the way down. You can sort of just like expand the first tweet and the rest will show up. So it's eliminated that problem of trying to figure out like where tweet 3 went and 4 and try and find them all, because in your feed is just timing, right? So if I type tweet 1 of 20 and then it takes me 5 minutes to type tweet 2 of 20, there's going to be a whole bunch of new tweets in between my tweet 1 and tweet 2. And that's where you would get lost. But now with the thread, they're literally all tied together. So it makes it much easier. So threads are great because we are very rarely able to say everything we want to say in just one tweet. And this allows you to tell a story, which is great. All right. So we have 15 minutes, which is usually about how much time I leave for questions. So I'm not going to pop out to Twitter. You have the slides and this link is in the slides. I was giving this talk to some doctoral students and postdocs a while back, and I posted on Twitter and said, hey, Twitter, like, tell me, what benefits you've seen as an academic to using Twitter. And a whole bunch of people responded with really great examples of, oh, I wrote a grant with somebody who I discovered on Twitter, or, we have papers or just new projects going. So go to this tweet, click this link, it'll show you all the responses I got. So it's kind of a fun way to sort of see the power of Twitter by reading about the power of Twitter. I used the right hashtags and people came alive for it. So it's a great little deeper dive if you want some more examples of how to kind of the benefits of using Twitter. All right, so we have 13 minutes. I would love questions, or if you're one of these folks who's got more tips and tricks, like I said, I don't know everything. Twitter is constantly changing. And so please share if you have other ways that you use Twitter or social media or science communication, to master this. I would love to hear, everybody would love to hear, but I'm also happy to take questions directly. So let's see. Oh, Rebecca has a question. Do you have to know in advance how many tweets? You do not. You can just go for it. And just when you finally have decided you're done, you can hit tweet all. You can also, and this is great for someone, I imagine there's folks on the call, like you finish and you're like, oh, actually, I wanted to add one more point. You can go back and add another tweet even after you have tweeted all of them. So if you add 5 tweets and you hit tweet all and they all go live, they're all out there. And then you think, oh, one more thing. You go back to that 5th tweet. And as the person who tweeted it, you will be able to add another tweet still to it. So you can continue to build that thread, which a lot of people do because there will be lots of comments and they want to sort of like clarify something. So they'll go back and add an another tweet to the original thread. Kyla, are there certain types of information that's best to post, or does it just depend on the target goal? Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. It depends on your goal. And your target audience. If I'm really in the nerd weeds, as someone put it, and I like want to share this analytic method or talk about my KO1 and like how to craft your specific aims, it just really depends on what you're trying to go for. If you're really trying to reach the press or the lay audience, that's where I think hashtags are so important, because I'm going to use different hashtags. Like ImpSci is a science hashtag. Like that's going to be for my colleagues. If I want to talk about rural health, I'm going to use hashtag rural health. That's a thing that my non-scientific colleagues are probably following. So I think using the right hashtags, depending on your audience and the content, in addition to tailoring that content, is the best way to sort of get that message into the right sphere of Twitter. And are there ways to check metrics? Ooh. There are. I didn't talk about this here, and I think it's in my handout. It's an application from Twitter. It's called TweetDeck, and there are other. TweetDeck is created by Twitter. There are other things like TweetDeck that are sort of like third-party apps. But TweetDeck, if you have a Twitter account and you type into your browser tweetdeck.twitter.com, it will. If you're already signed into Twitter on that browser, it'll just open it up. Otherwise, you might have to sign in again. But it is a much more like nerdy, Twitter nerdy way to engage with Twitter that allows you to track analytics on your tweets. It used to be the only way you could schedule tweets, which I didn't talk about here, but now even in the normal Twitter app, you can schedule tweets to go out at a later time and date, which is really helpful if you're thinking of conferences. You know, and your poster's at 8:30 in the morning and you don't want to tweet at 8:30 in the morning, you can schedule your tweet to go out at 8:30 in the morning the night before. But TweetDeck is a really great way to track analytics, to track engagement, you can do some of that through the Twitter app itself. If you click on a tweet, you can sort of see the engagement, you know, like how many shares and how many, it tells you, it has a descriptor called engagement, which kind of tells you their own metric of how many people shared it, and then it measures that based on their followers and blah, blah, blah. But I think TweetDeck is a really, if you haven't looked, if you're interested in that kind of level of detail behind your tweets and how to track and see what's going well, TweetDeck, like a patio deck, like TweetDeck, DECK, .twitter.com can kind of give you that level of insight. And then if you really want to go into it, like there are much more advanced applications that you have to pay for that will track a lot of that stuff. But if you're kind of just wanting to see maybe what tweets are hitting the most, TweetDeck is a good way for that. Dipping my toes back in, I guess. Yeah, I think it's going to get better. I think we're kind of over until the next like politicized crisis, right? Like, I think the fervor of the pandemic is dying down in terms of attacking scientists and attacking anybody with a, you know, advanced degree behind their name. I think that is starting to die down. Of course, the next thing is going to come up. We're never going to get away from that. And as I was saying at the beginning, I don't know what's going to change. I know a lot of people have closed their Twitter accounts with even when Elon Musk was going to take over. Now that he has actually taken over, I don't think it's going to change in a big way, but I can't say for sure, because when you see really big people closing their Twitter accounts, you just don't know. But I think going forward, I think it's going to get the fervor of the pandemic is going to die down. You're still going to have bots, you're still going to have trolls. But I think it's going to go back to a little bit of its pre-pandemic level, unless you're doing research or clinical practice or whatever that is always like an evergreen hot topic like gun violence. Then I think you'll always have that, and that's just the unfortunate reality of social media and the internet in general. But it's always changing, and like I said at the beginning, take breaks. I love Twitter. I'm here. Like, I'm talking to you about it. I love it. I have tons of followers. I love engaging, but I've kind of gone through a lull this like summer and fall where I just, my work picked up. I got a KO1. I've been really busy. And I was just like, I can't do it. I'll get back into it. I'm going to a conference next week. I'm sure that'll sort of get me jazzed and spurred on again, but don't beat yourself up if you feel like you need to take the breaks. Like I said, I'm just a really big advocate for doing what feels right and like taking the time that you need. So if it starts to feel overwhelming, if you feel like you're doom scrolling or you feel like you're getting attacked, close it, spend some time off of it. You can snooze people or mute people, I think they call it. So if there's a particular user that is like annoying you, you can block people. If there's somebody who's outright like being aggressive and mean, you can just block that user and they can't contact you. They can't show up. They'll be blocked. But if there's just people who you're kind of like tired of seeing their content or you're just, you don't want to like unfollow them, whatever, you can mute them, and it just temporarily pauses their content from showing up in your feeds. And that can be a nice break, if there's just some, or you can mute entire hashtags. And that's something I should definitely point out. If you go into TweetDeck, and I think you can probably do it through the app, but I actually tend to use TweetDeck more, just for various reasons. But TweetDeck allows you to mute hashtags. So if there's content that you really don't want to see, you can tell Twitter, like, don't show me tweets that have these words in them, and they won't show up in your feed. So if there's if there's a topic you're just tired of hearing about, or, it's triggering or whatever, you can tell Twitter, don't show me any content with that word in it. And so that's a good way if you're feeling just sort of the negativity is becoming overwhelming. Also create multiple Twitter accounts. I have multiple Twitter accounts. I have my personal one where I stalk food trucks, and I have my one where I do my professional work. And so that's a good way too. If you like the app and you like interacting, but you need sort of that palate cleanser, have another Twitter account where you only follow, fun, uplifting stuff. So I found that's kind of a nice break too, is using those other Twitter accounts. Any other questions? I think I have anything. Yes. So please feel free to email me if you have questions that you didn't want to discuss publicly in the chat. I'm happy to talk directly. If you're on Twitter, follow me. I'll follow you. I'll retweet you. I'll promote your work. I love it when more people get on Twitter, and really just think the more we're on there as a field of scientists and clinicians and people who want to make the world a better place, it's better if we're on there than not. So please join if you're not, or as I said, I love all science communication. So if Twitter is not your thing, social media is not your thing, but you want to ask some more questions about how to write op-eds, or talk to local organizations, or whatever those interests are, please feel free to email me about that kind of stuff too. I love all science communication. Any last bits of questions? Well, Kyla, I will turn it back over to you, unless you maybe you have additional instructions for folks. I know 11 o'clock was the end time and I'm 4 minutes early, but I don't want to just hold the line if folks want to go and grab lunch before their next session or something.
I think we would ask that people sign out so that they can get their certifications. I believe she's reaching out to the next presenter at 11.
Gotcha.
So she might be off doing that.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Didn't even know she was gone. Well, thank you all very, very much for your great engagement. This was I loved the questions you asked and the engagement. Super great crowd. And thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. I'm thrilled to meet you all via Zoom.